there guys, PortalMaster9351 here, and in today's video, I am going to be talking about Skylanders Battlecast, the failed trading card game that was for Skylanders. So, in this video, I'm going to be talking about why I personally believe it failed so badly. It did not just fail, it did terribly. I mean, the entire team that developed Skylanders Battlecast was fired within months of its release. And these are not just random people they picked up off the street. It's not like they went to a homeless person and said, hey, do you want to come develop this card game for us? That's not what happened at all. These are like experienced card developers. Some people came from like the Hearthstone development team, the people that made Skylanders Battlecast. These people knew what they were doing. So I'm going to be looking at why it did as badly as it did. Now, there are 5 key reasons that I can think of that it failed as badly as it did. Reason number 1, the game was not polished. It didn't look done. It didn't visually look very good. Don't get me wrong, the cards looked just fine, but the problem was the game itself did not look visually appealing. The second issue is that there was no ad campaign. Unless you were in the Skylanders community, there's no way you knew ahead of time that this was coming out unless you were paying close attention to the stuff that you had been given. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. The third reason is that there was no mainline tie-in. If you bought figures, you didn't get anything for the game. If you bought cards for the game, you didn't get anything for the main game. That was also a really massive issue. The fourth reason is that there was no way to play other people physically or digitally very well, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, but there was no way to play with the cards that you bought. The fifth reason is it was too random, and that's another reason as to why it was very difficult to play with other people, at least physically speaking, and it was one of the reasons that the game never had much of a potential to become very competitive. So let's first expand on point number 1, which was that there was no actual polish for the game. Now, I'm not dissing the people that made the card art, because like I said, the card art looked really good, and the game itself was okay, but the problem is that visually speaking, the frame rate was bad, the graphics were bad, and just, it looked unprofessional. It looked very poorly designed. Take a look at the Hearthstone main menu, for instance. Now look at the Battlecast main menu, for instance. Which one looks more visually appealing? It's got to be the Hearthstone one. In my opinion, it's the Hearthstone one. And considering that Hearthstone and Battlecast are literally from the same company, more or less. I mean, I know one is Activision and one is Blizzard, but they're basically the same thing when you take into account Activision Blizzard. You would have thought they would have been able to go, hey Blizzard, pals, can you help us with our card game? Oh yeah, sure, you've got to have a really good looking main menu. Oh okay, well we won't do that, we'll just stick with our design instead. Kind of feels like what had to happen there, because the main menu was just not good, and I don't know, it's just the game itself didn't look good, at least in my opinion. And I think that's a big reason as to why it might have turned off certain people, just because looking at the art style and not really liking it. Second reason that it was very unsuccessful is that because there was no ad campaign. There was no marketing, no advertising, no nothing for Skylanders Battlecast. The extent of the marketing for Skylanders Battlecast was this. Let's stick a Spitfire and a Stealth Elf card in the starter pack. You can't even use them yet because the game's not out, but let's stick them in there anyways, and let's basically let people understand and take a look at the name, become familiarized with it, so that when it comes out later, they'll insta-download it. That's not what happened at all. Nobody knew about it. Nobody cared. The people that did know about it just didn't care. There was no marketing campaign. It did not look engaging enough. And I don't know, it never rose. It was never featured anywhere. That's the problem. It was just brushed away. Nobody cared about it. Nobody from the company cared about it. The general public didn't care about it. And that's why the game crashed and burned so quickly. Another massive issue with this game is that there was no mainline tie-in, if you understand what I'm saying. If you were a fan of the core Skylanders franchise, there was no reason to get Battlecast. It rewarded you with absolutely nothing in Skylanders. Also, if you were interested in the card game, there was no reason to get the Skylanders. Although, I don't think there were a ton of people just interested in the card game, because if you're really into the card game, it seems like you would go to a different thing like Hearthstone or something along those lines. All of the games, the original 4 games, Spyro's Adventure, Giant, Swap Force, and Trap Team, all characters came with a 100% useless collectible card. So all of a sudden, when these collectible cards get a game, although it was a different type of card, admittedly, as soon as there's a potential use for these cards, what does Activision do? They get rid of the cards entirely. They got rid of them all. There was no cards. And it's like, why would you do that? Why would you get rid of these cards in your figures? Because that's free marketing for your own game. It takes like literally a cent to make a card, if that. And it would not have been hard to have included cards in the Skylanders, Superchargers, and Imaginators stuff. And yet, they didn't. They just decided, no, we're not gonna do cards. So, I don't know. But to me, it seems like they really missed an opportunity to spread awareness of Battlecast. I mean, there were only 18 characters in Superchargers, yes, and 18 vehicles, but if you had bought all of those, you would have gotten 36 cards. And considering that the original Battlecast set had like around 300 cards, you would have gotten over a tenth of your collection that way. If I'm actually correct, that works out to about 12% of the entire collection, just from buying figures. So that would have been a massive motivation to people who buy the figures to also buy Battlecast. But unfortunately, there was no sort of a tie-in there. And it was a really stupid move, if you ask me. Yes, it means that every character would have had to have been playable. But that wouldn't have been very hard to have just made all the playable characters from Superchargers, plus a couple from the older games that you could get in booster packs and those other card packs. That was a big problem in my opinion, and it's definitely a problem that Lightseekers has solved in their card game. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Lightseekers card game at an end and sort of what set it apart from Battlecast, because I think that's a notable comparison that needs to be made, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. On to the fourth reason. There was no way to play Skylanders Battlecast physically. And to me, that was a huge, huge issue. If it is a 100% digital game played completely in an app, why do we need to buy cards for it? That never made any sense to me. Is it just so you can say, look at us, we have AR effects? Is that the only reason that it's supposed to be a game you can play digitally? Because if you're only doing it for the sake of having something be AR enabled, that's pretty dumb, honestly, because it provided nothing to the game. It made it complicated to scan in cards. There was literally a motivation to buy your cards in-game rather than in the flesh, in the paper. There was no reason to buy them from the store because you could buy them in-app. They wouldn't take up space, which is basically all they do after you scan them in. What are you supposed to do with them? Play with them? Oh, that's right, you can't. And so that actually lets me segue into the fifth reason, which sort of explains why it was so unplayable, at least physically speaking. It was too random. Skylanders Battlecast was incredibly random. There was so much randomness and luck that was in Skylanders Battlecast that it made it not very skill-based, at least in my opinion. It's like the game was not ever meant to be a competitive game. But we know from press releases that that was not the goal. The goal was to be a competitive game. They were going to make a ranked online mode, not unlike Hearthstone. But yet, nothing. There was no ranked system ever implemented. It could have never worked as a competitive game anyways, because it was so random. And to have kept up with all of the random elements in a physical card game would have been nearly impossible. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you can't have randomness in a competitive game. I mean, especially if it's a card game. The entire system of drawing your cards is 100% random. Hearthstone has a large degree of randomness, and it's able to do that because it is in a online format, but it does not overdo that sort of randomness, and it's not supposed to be a physical card game either. It's advertised as a digital card game, not a card you buy cards for and scan it into a game. Magic the Gathering and Pokemon have random elements in it as well, but still not to the degree that Skylanders Battlecast did, and I think that that was a really big issue, not only with not being able to play it physically, but also had it been successful, one of the reasons it never would have worked as a competitive game and would have only worked as a casual game. So, what should have been done differently? First up, the game visually should have been designed better. I've seen what some people can do with online iPad mobile games. If any of you guys have ever seen the game Vainglory, I'll put a picture up there beside of this. Vainglory is one of the most visually stunning games, or Infinity Blade also, but Vainglory and games like Infinity Blade utilize such a high level of graphics in a game, and that was not there in Battlecast. It was grainy. It was just looked bad, honestly, compared to something like Vainglory or Infinity Blade. I mean, the graphics were very subpar. They could have been upped. They could have been done so much better, and that would have made the game look a lot better and attracted a lot more new players. They could have put out an ad campaign. That would have drawn in a lot of new players as well, and unfortunately, by not having that ad campaign, they were never able to draw in very much of an audience. They could have tied it in with the figures. That was another issue. There was no motivation for figure owners to buy the game. It gave you nothing in the main game, so I mean, there was just not a lot of tie-in. It was kind of like a game that was themed to be with Skylanders, but had nothing to do with the brand as a whole. That was another big issue with the game, and if they had figured out a way to have bridged the gap between them, I have a feeling that a lot more people would have been willing to have bought the cards. They could have made it less random and made it playable in physical form from the get-go. I know they're going to be releasing rules so that people can play it physically very soon. There's a thunderstorm outside in case you can hear thunder, so sorry about that, but they're going to be releasing rules for playing it physically, and they should have done that a lot earlier and made it a lot more physically friendly, basically, if that makes sense. They should not have made it so random, and if they had done that, it would have been much more successful. So, with that in mind, I'm going to briefly talk about Lightseekers, the card game, exclusively the card game. Say what you will about the actual video game Lightseekers itself, but the Lightseekers card game is much, much better than Skylanders Battlecast ever could have dreamed of becoming. The Lightseekers card game is miles ahead of the Skylanders Battlecast game. And basically, it's because they fixed a lot of the issues with Skylanders. Granted, there's not a way to play it digitally yet, but they are working on making it where you can play with your Lightseekers deck in-game, and I think that's great. So, I mean, the biggest issue I have with the card game is already being solved. There's going to be a way to play it digitally in addition to playing it physically, which you already can do. You can play it physically now. There's an ad campaign. There's tie-ins with the actual brand as a whole. You buy the accessories, you get cards. Makes a lot of sense. And it's not random to an extent that it's, you know, it doesn't overdo the concept of randomness. Yes, like there's a card in the Astral Starter deck that's like, draw a card. If it's this, do this. If it's this, do this. Yeah, there's cards like that. But is it random to the degree that Battlecast was? Absolutely not. And that's one of the reasons that it can be played as a physical card game. There's AR effects with Lightseekers, and there's an actual motivation to scan them into your game. You get bonuses. Eventually, you're going to be able to play with them in-game in addition to physically as well. They're going to do expansions. They already have an expansion plan for the beginning of next year, and there's like actual marketing that's coming for the Lightseekers physical video game and the card game. So they've really actually fixed a lot of the issues that Battlecast had, and so I don't know. I think they used it as a learning experience because it seems that like a lot what was wrong with Battlecast, they fixed in their game. And I think it would have been I think it would have been really easy for Activision to have fixed those issues, but they didn't. So it's really unfortunate what happened with Battlecast. I was really hoping that it was going to be good. As a person who does casually play card games, I really wanted it to be good. And unfortunately, it just wasn't. So that's pretty much it for this video. What I'm curious about though is what you guys think was the biggest problem with Skylanders Battlecasts. Obviously, there were a lot of things that I just mentioned, so I really am curious what your biggest issue with the game was. But anyways, that's all for now. This has been Portal Master 9351. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.